Thank you so much. Our next storyteller is from Singapore. Samantha is a fourth-year student studying public policy at Singapore Management University, or SMU. She is also the vice president of SMU Literature, which brings together SMU students with a shared love of literature. She believes in the power of sharing and listening to each other's stories to shape the world. Welcome, Samantha.
Hi, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. So the title of my speech today is A Little Piece of Land. So at the start of this year, I finally found the impulse to go to the community garden that was about a 15-minute walk from my house to ask if I could have a small garden plot for myself to grow plants of my own. You see, as a child, I was always trying to grow plants along the balcony of my HDB flat, but they would always die because there was not enough sunlight, and then I would have to throw them away. So now as a young adult, it felt like vindication to bring home a contract stipulating my ownership of a small garden plot, which I had bought with the money I painstakingly earned on my own from my internship, which meant that I was now free to grow whatever plants I pleased. I did not know back then just how much getting that little garden plot would make me fundamentally reevaluate so many relationships in my life. My relationship to the land, my relationship to others, and above all, my own relationship to myself. For one, that little garden plot changed the relationship I had with my senses. It introduced me to new fragrances and tastes. I was able to grow herbs, vegetables, and berries that I could not buy from supermarkets, such as cranberry hibiscus, ulam raja, java ginseng, pennywort, and mulberries. It also changed my relationship with the weather. I used to despise how hot Singapore could get, and then how heavily it would rain afterwards. But after I got my little garden plot, I realized that, this is the blazing sun and the cool rain that nurtures all life in my island city. Most of all, getting that little garden plot changed the relationship I had with the people around me. Here's the secret. If you get into gardening, you should not have to spend too much money buying plants. Often you can just ask a fellow gardener or even post on the Facebook group to ask if anyone is willing to give you a cutting of a plant. That vulnerable act of asking is often rewarded in turn with the generosity of a fellow gardening enthusiast, along with some free gardening advice that you throw in. Often, this kindness feels like it's worth more than the plant itself, and the warmth from this exchange lingers long after this plant has grown. That little garden plot that I got also brought me closer to the many truths of the world, but it also meant that it opened my eyes to the ugliness and the arbitrary cruelties that the world can have sometimes. The first person I gave my harvest of herbs and vegetables to was my best friend. After eating them, she told me that the taste of these herbs and vegetables that could not be easily found in the supermarkets of Singapore, they reminded her of those she used to eat in her home back in Myanmar. It took her back to a simpler time, to meals spent with friends and family, a time before the spate of violence and unrest perpetuated by the military, a time before the pandemic that was so rapidly infecting the population in Myanmar, a time before so many of the relatives she knew had funerals she couldn't attend, not while she was still stuck in Singapore. All that just from some plants I gave her that could only capture the memory of what had been, but never replace what she had lost. Even now, I still see her grieving over how much she has lost in these tumultuous times, even as she tries to stay strong with a smile and carry on with her studies in university, even as she continues to care and grieve about her homeland. And sometimes I would also bump into landscape gardeners who were migrant workers, and they would talk about missing their family back home. They would often garden back home in their hometowns, but now they maintain gardens for others, and they would often emphasize how they weren't going to grow any plants in these gardens that they worked and sweat upon. And in the public parks that I went to, I began to notice signs saying no loitering, and they would often be in the languages spoken by migrant and domestic workers in Singapore. And I knew what this was meant to imply about who belonged in these public spaces. And in the back of my mind, I also thought about how for many migrant and domestic workers, their movements were being so much more restricted now since the start of COVID-19. even as small Singaporeans were going out to enjoy these garden spaces. And I also thought about how, for many of those of lower income levels in Singapore, they also don't have enough time to spare for leisure activities like gardening or to travel beyond where they live and work, and they live in this small bubble in Singapore. So all this made me realize that every day that there are struggles being silently fought over who gets to own land, who gets access to spaces, and who gets to feel like they belong to places. Not everyone, after all, can buy a little garden plot of one's own, not like I did. And not everyone can peacefully garden without having the fear of losing a loved one to the pandemic haunting the edges of their mind. Through my little garden plot, I've grown to recognize my privilege, but which has also imbued me with a sense of urgency and agency. I truly believe that everyone should have a right to a piece of land, to peace of mind, and a sense of agency of their own, that they can shape their society to be better and brighter, that everyone should have the space to explore themselves as they express themselves, as they chart out the relationships that they have with others. But then again, what is to be done? I'm not entirely sure, because in many ways, these issues boil down to that of laws and policies and institutions and national histories that are beyond the control of any one individual. Against these, I've simply tried to plant seeds of kindness, hoping that it might make things at least a little bit better. For instance, I gave my best friend some of the plants I grew to put by her windowsill to remind her of better times back home. And I've also taken my cue from how others have sown such seeds of hope. I've joined this ground-up group called Sire Story, where Singaporeans and foreign domestic workers together bond over gardening, such as by exchanging gardening tips, seeds, cuttings, and plants. It's incredible to watch how local and foreign leaders in the community are figuring out how we can grow together as gardeners and in our appreciation of our shared natural heritage in this region. It's also heartwarming to see how some employers also grow plants alongside the domestic workers in their home. In this broken world, I feel that the little bits of kindness that we can give each other can be so important. I want to believe that a shared love of giving life, be it to plants or each other, might just be enough to tide us through each step that we take to bridge the divides and injustices in society, for us to grow together as people. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Samantha. I think Sayo's story, I also inside that group. Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought if any one of you heard about the Sayo story, you can go and take that. You search on the Facebook, Sayo story. It talks about gardening and any kind of plants. Actually, I'm not really active like commenting or liking on that group, but I do reading. And it really educates me about plants, what kind of seeds. There was one time, someone posted one seed. They were asking what kind of seed is that. I thought that was just a nut, but actually it's another different kind of plant. And I was so awkward, but I learned from that group. It really tells about plants. And you can see Singaporeans and domestic workers bond about gardening. And it's also plants, I agree that it really reflects into people. You know, whatever you plant in your head, it will really grow. Yes, if you don't really take care of it, it will die just like you, your thoughts, your happiness, your peace. So, yeah, just a quick story about of mine. My grandma is a orchid lover, is a plant lover, and well, I am opposite. I love plant, but the plant don't love me because my grandma said I have a warm hand. Everything I touch will die. I don't know, and I don't understand. So when I was young, they don't really allow me to touch any of her plants. But I want to touch. I want to take care of plants. But so what she do to me, she was bluffing me when I was a very young age. She asked me to take care of those grasses at the backyard. She told me that it was a plant and I need to take care, but you need to pluck it off one by one until all the backyard was all clean. Because she told me that I need to take care of the other plants by pulling the dead or the other unhealthy grass. So that is how my grandma used of me. by bullying all those classes. Thank you, Samantha. I hope that group of you, Sayo story will gain more of people sharing the story.